All right, good morning. As the kiddos head out of here, we're going to read Ecclesiastes 10, which when I read through it this morning was a whole bunch of crazy sounding proverbs and stuff. So I got kind of lost, and I really look forward to hearing what Austin does with it because it's kind of weird. Dead flies make the perfumer's ointment give off a stench, so a little folly outweighs wisdom and honor. A wise man's heart inclines him to the right, but a fool's heart to the left. Even when the fool walks on the road, he lacks sense, and he says to everyone that he is a fool. If the anger of the ruler rises against you, do not leave your place, for calmness will lay great offenses to rest. There is an evil that I have seen under the sun, as it were an error proceeding from the ruler. Folly is set in many high places, and the rich sit in a low place. I have seen slaves on horses and princes walking on the ground like slaves. He who digs a pit will fall into it, and the serpent will bite him who breaks through a wall. He who quarries stones is hurt by them, and he who splits logs is endangered by them. If the iron is blunt and one does not sharpen the edge, he must use more strength, but wisdom helps one to succeed. If the serpent bites before it is charmed, there is no advantage to the charmer. The words of a wise man's mouth win him favor, but the lips of a fool consume him. The beginning of the words of his mouth is foolishness, and the end of his talk is evil madness. A fool multiplies words, though no man knows what is to be, and who can tell him what will be after him? The toil of a fool wearies him, for he does not know the way to the city. Woe to you, O land, when your king is a child and your princes feast in the morning. Happy are you, O land, when your king is the son of nobility, and your princes feast at the proper time, for strength and not for drunkenness. Through sloth the roof sinks in, and through indolence the house leaks. Bread is made for laughter, and wine gladdens life, and money answers everything. Even in your thoughts do not curse the king, nor in your bedroom curse the rich, for a bird of the air will carry your voice, or some winged creature tell the matter.
Good morning. So my name is Austin. My wife, Eric, and I have been members here at Believers Church for about 8 years, give or take a little bit. We have 2 little girls, Amelia, who is going to be 4 next week. Lydia turned 2 at the end of August. So we have a happy family and a good community here at BC. Eric and I are MC leaders. We've been in that role for about 4 years. Really enjoy that, and just being able to see how community is done on an even smaller scale within the body as a whole. So this is actually my 3rd time preaching here at Believers Church, and I can tell you with certainty, every time that Dan asks me if I want to preach, my instinct is to be like, thank you. No, I don't want to do that. I'm not a huge fan of speaking in front of people, but every time I start prepping for the sermon and really digging into the Word, I can see how the Lord is just growing me more and more and just drawing me closer to Himself through the Word. I'm also super thankful to be part of a body like BC that offers the opportunity to actually let others preach and to build up leaders in the church, people who may not even want to do this or feel like they're called to do this. It's still such a huge blessing. So if you are visiting BC today or you've missed the last few weeks, we've been going through Ecclesiastes, and last week Silas brought us through chapter 9, so we're continuing that into chapter 10 today. The latter part of chapter 9 flows pretty well into chapter 10. Obviously, both 9 and 10, they're next to each other, but also the content is pretty similar. The end of chapter 9 talks a lot about wisdom versus folly and how foolishness impacts our day-to-day lives. So that's going to kind of remain our theme through today's chapter as well. I'm going to start by saying that the wisdom that the preacher is referencing throughout chapter 10 is not earthly wisdom. We can look back at the first 9 chapters of Ecclesiastes and remember that earthly wisdom is described as vapor. It's something that you can maybe see, but it's not really tangible. It's not something that you can grab or kind of take hold of. But the wisdom that we should be applying to our lives and what we're going to be talking about in chapter 10 is wisdom that comes from the Lord. So you can look through all sorts of different places in the New Testament and the Old Testament to see that is the point. So today I chose 1 Corinthians 2, 12 through 14, which I believe is on a slide. So This is going to be the verse that I kind of look through chapter 10 of Ecclesiastes through, just to kind of reference back that wisdom is coming from the Spirit of the Lord. So we can read that really quick. Now we have received not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit who is from God, that we might understand the things freely given to us by God. And we impart this in words not taught by human wisdom, but taught by the Spirit, interpreting spiritual truths to those who are spiritual. The natural person does not accept the things of the Spirit of God, for they are folly to him. He is not able to understand them because they are spiritually discerned. So I'm going to pray really quick, and then we can dive into the chapter. Father, we thank you for gathering us together today. We just thank you that we can come to you and worship you and dive into your word and just see more about who you are and the different ways that you bless us. Spirit, I just pray that you would be moving here today. I just pray that our hearts would be softened to your word and that we can learn more and apply the wisdom and the truth that you provide to our lives every single day. Jesus, please just help us as we move through service. Help us to be focused on you more than anything. In your name we pray. Amen. Okay, I'm going to start by saying my mom and dad are here. And I can confidently tell you that if you were able to time travel back like 15, 16 years ago and asked if their son would be preaching a sermon on a Sunday about wisdom versus foolishness, they would probably just laugh in your face. There were enough ER visits and stories and just firsthand experiences that they had to kind of go through that would probably justify that response pretty well. So here we are, it's happening. So in verse 1, I'll read that really quick as we're going through it. So, dead flies make the perfumer's ointment give off a stench, so a little folly outweighs wisdom and honor. I will be very upfront with everyone. Dan asked me a few months ago if I could preach on a couple of different options. It was like chapter 9 last week, chapter 10 this week, and I chose this one purely for scheduling reasons. I was like, I can do that one. October 13th sounds like a good day. Erica and I were on a trip. We were busy. We had a lot going on. And then I sat down and read the verse after I'd already confirmed it. And I was like, oh, like, what did I just do? Like, what have I gotten myself into? But like, I kind of shook off the initial confusion of what am I reading right now? And we can start to kind of see what the preacher's trying to convey. So a few weeks ago, Dan Ware took us through chapter 7. In verse 1 of chapter 7, the preacher says, a good name is better than precious ointment. So now, here in chapter 10, we're seeing him say now that ointment can be ruined by dead flies, whatever that might mean. But how can such small things ruin something so quickly? In terms of foolishness, it doesn't take one grandiose or spectacular act of foolishness to outweigh wisdom or to change the perception that someone might have of us. It can be small things that we do or say that are going to add up over time that really start to kind of shift us into being spiritually wise into something that might be more foolish. So we'll kind of continue back through this and see where that takes us. So verse 2 says, a wise man's heart inclines him to the right, but a fool's heart to the left. Even when the fool walks on the road, he lacks sense, and he says to everyone that he is a fool. These are just continuing to tell us to choose spiritual wisdom over foolishness. Consider your actions. Are the small things that you're doing, your life choices, what you're saying to people, being done with wisdom that you're getting from the Lord? Are you seeking the Lord's counsel in everyday circumstances, even maybe the small or mundane things? Verse 3 says that a foolish person lacks sense, and they say to everyone that they are a fool. So this is obviously not saying that people are just going to walk down the street and be like, I'm being foolish right now. Give me some space. Like, I don't want to affect you. That would make my life way easier. Specifically, my job would be infinitely busier if people were just upfront with me and said, I'm being really foolish. I'm making poor choices. Just bear with me. But what this is actually saying is it's easy to see someone who's lacking wisdom, that spiritual discernment that they have. They may be wise in terms of what the world is saying is wise, but the true wisdom that we need from the Lord that is really grounding us back where we need to be is clearly not on display. And whether that is the big acts that they're doing or the compounding small things that they are saying or their actions or what they are saying that their hope is being put into, what they're looking forward to. Those are like those little dead flies. That is how we can see that they're foolishness. They're not broadcasting it in their speech, like declaring that foolishness, but they may be able to put that on display otherwise. On the flip side of that, we should be able to recognize the people who are wise and who are seeking wisdom from the Lord and who are really leaning into the Lord for assistance and help in those circumstances. And as believers, that's who we should be striving to be. It should be on display for others to see. And whether that's other believers saying, I can come to you for counsel, like I can understand, like you can help me in these situations. Or for non-believers, they may not recognize what that wisdom is, that true wisdom, or if they do, they may not want anything to do with it. They may not appreciate that. But they should still be able to tell the difference and know, like, okay, this person is getting their wisdom from a different source. It's not coming from here. So verse 4 says, if the anger of the ruler rises against you, do not leave your place, for calmness will lay great offenses to rest. As I was getting ready for this sermon and kind of prepping, verse 4 really started to stick out to me a lot more. It may seem kind of like a random one-off verse, but kind of like Daniel said, this is like a conglomeration of a whole lot of weird proverbs that are just kind of put all together. And this one really started to kind of stick with me. In this circumstance, the preacher is saying that we shouldn't be quick to react to someone's actions against us. He's talking about the anger of a ruler. But I think that's applicable in everyday life, even for us. So calmness and a level head is better than a fast reaction. So why this has really been sticking with me as of late, over the past month and a half, the ruler of my house, my almost 4-year-old daughter, Amelia, has hit a pretty rough patch, like kids her age probably do. And I could personally benefit from starting to memorize this verse and take it to heart even more. I'm very, very quick to argue back with her or dig my heels in and try to like exert my will upon her, especially when she's arguing with me, digging in her heels and exerting her 4-year-old will on me. So in these circumstances, Erica and I try and counsel her, and we really hit on James 1:19 through 20, which is the September Kids Connect verse for all you parents who have kids in Kids Connect. And we'll read it really quick. It's on the slide right here. Know this, my beloved brothers, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. For the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. So that is really good wisdom that is coming from the Lord that can be applicable in any circumstance. And I need to remember this verse just as much as Amelia does, and probably even more so. And I think we can all really dwell on that verse and pray that that would really come into our hearts in the circumstances at work, at home, in everyday discussion. We should be quick to hear and slow to speak and slow to get angry with others. In verse 5, it says, there is an evil that I have seen under the sun, as it were an error proceeding from the ruler. Keep going through 7. Folly is set in many high places, and the rich sit in a low place. I have seen slaves on horses and princes walking on the ground like slaves. So Silas kind of touched on this point a little bit last week at the end of chapter 9. These verses, the preacher is starting to recognize that there is an error under the sun. So if you haven't been here, if you're visiting or not familiar with Ecclesiastes, under the sun basically just means like our world, our current situation. So there's an error. Something just isn't quite as it should be. The preacher uses the examples of folly being set in high places and the rich sitting in low places. The rich there being those who are like indwelled with the Spirit, who are really leaning into the Lord, not like wealthy, rich. And slaves on horses and princes walking on the ground. And what it seems to be saying here is the world is backwards. All of those things should be flipped around. I think the first example really resonates well today. We can see how folly and foolishness are really glorified in our society. And whether that is the latest social media trends or lifestyles that are being promoted or sought after, like those are the things that you are told constantly, like seek after these things and you're going to have a good life. Whereas those who are rich in true wisdom and are really asking the Lord for guidance and counsel are usually treated more poorly, or they're cast aside because of what they believe and kind of the stigma that may carry. And this brings me to a quote. My MC will probably be able to bank where this quote is coming from. It's coming from Gandalf in Lord of the Rings, specifically the book Fellowship of the Ring. So if you are not familiar with Lord of the Rings whatsoever, find me after service. We will set up a time to watch them, or I will lend you the books. We will correct that issue. Just for a little bit of context, this quote is happening. All of the characters of the Fellowship are at a secret council. They've discovered the One Ring, like this weapon of the enemy, true evil, and they're trying to figure out what we need to do with it. How are we going to handle this? Some people are saying that we need to use it against Sauron, the enemy, but it's ultimately decided that they need to destroy it. So they know that Sauron would think that's totally foolish. Like, no one would ever think to destroy this. They're going to use this against me because he's using that worldly wisdom of like, you can't refuse this. Like, it is folly to not use this. So we'll read what Gandalf is saying really quick. Despair or folly, said Gandalf, it is not despair, for despair is only for those who see the end beyond all doubt. We do not. It is wisdom to recognize necessity. When all other courses have been weighed, though as folly it may appear to those who cling to false hope. Well, let folly be our cloak, a veil before the eyes of the enemy. For he is very wise and weighs all things to nicety in the scales of his malice. But the only measure that he knows is desire for power. And so he judges all hearts. Into his heart, the thought will not enter that any will refuse it, that having the ring, we may seek to destroy it. If we seek this, we shall put him out of reckoning. So right there, kind of to just clarify a little bit, probably doesn't need it, but I'm going to anyway. Gandalf is saying that like the folly that Sauron sees trying to destroy the ring is actually true wisdom. And we're going to use the veil of that's foolish as the veil, the cloak to get what we need done. So our world sees that the need for power or wealth or knowledge, any of these kinds of things as the wise choice. You should want to get more money to have a better life. You should want to be knowledgeable so you can learn and you can be smart and people can ask you for counsel. Those are things that we're told by society that we should be seeking. But they see believers as buying into folly, the faith that we have in Jesus, promises that we cling to, and the wisdom that we're given through the Spirit, when in reality it is flipped. Even the preacher says these worldly things are just vapor. The preacher has weighed the other courses, to use Gandalf's verbiage in that quote. The preacher is said to have extraordinary wealth. He's incredibly wise and he's a strong king. And earlier in Ecclesiastes, he talks about not finding an end. Those are vapor. They're not real, tangible things. Non-believers are still clinging to these false hopes too. They're seeing all of that desire and what we should seek after as true wisdom. But now we get to use the folly, the truth that we find in Christ and that wisdom for a means to a better end. And we can recognize that the world is like this because it's been corrupted by sin. We live in a world that is still feeling the pangs of the fall. This error that the preacher notices is the brokenness in the world that is beginning to manifest because of sin and because of the time that we live in. However, we as believers now know that these things are going to be made right. And all of the errors that are under the sun that we can see and the preacher recognizes will be corrected. Jesus is making all things new, and we can now look forward to the day when there's going to be a new heaven and a new earth, free from errors and free from the curse of the fall. So we will keep on moving into verse 8 through 11. It says, he who digs a pit will fall into it, and a serpent will bite him who breaks through a wall. He who quarries stones is hurt by them, and he who splits log is endangered by them. If the iron is blunt and one does not sharpen the edge, he must use more strength, but wisdom helps one to succeed. If the serpent bites before it is charmed, there is no advantage to the charmer. I'm going to start once again, be very transparent with you. As I was prepping for this, getting into chapter 10 more, I cannot read verse 8 without thinking of the show Parks and Rec and thinking about Andy Dwyer singing about falling into a pit. So that is just a glimpse into how my mind works. It is an odd place. So each of these verses is just giving us more examples of the need for true wisdom in different types of situations. Being wise and using caution in different circumstances is going to yield better results. Whether you're digging a pit or breaking through a wall, quarrying stones, splitting logs, or doing something more common for most people in 2024, you need to be wise in how you're approaching it. You need to really ask the Lord for counsel and wisdom when you're doing those things. And I don't think it's anything like this. I think it's, for better examples for us, talking with a coworker that you might have some conflict with, or a rough conversation you have to have with your boss, dealing with a difficult toddler or someone that you may not know, just having a disagreement. We can seek the Lord in those moments and know that he is going to provide the wisdom on how to handle those situations. Wisdom and calmness, kind of like what we talked about in verse 4, are going to go a long way in how those interactions play out and how we are perceived. Verse 10 talks about preparing for what you are about to do. And we shouldn't be trying to force our way through these situations or these conversations or the actions, but we should go in preparing our hearts for that and seeking the Lord through it. We can ask the Spirit for any kind of wisdom in those situations. We can seek out the Lord to help us and not just try and push through it and not be wise and make it a lot harder for ourselves. So we'll move into verse 12 through 15, which kind of connects back to where we just were. So the words of a wise man's mouth win him favor, but the lips of a fool consume him. The beginning of the words of his mouth is foolishness, and the end of his talk is evil madness. A fool multiplies words, though no man knows what it is to be, and who can tell him what will be after him? The toil of a fool wearies him, for he does not know the way to the city. So I don't think it would be too much of a stretch to say that we've all kind of been in a situation that you don't really think about what you're saying to someone else and how it might be affecting them, whether that's an argument with a spouse, a coworker, a friend, whoever it might be. You're in the conversation, you might be arguing a little bit, things are getting a little bit more tense, and something comes out of your mouth and you wish you could just snatch it and bring it back and get it completely out of there. And I think this refers really well back to James 1 as well. We should be quick to hear and slow to speak and slow to anger. I think in today's age, in our society, it's really pushed that you should be prepared to defend yourself in any kind of discussion. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. We should know that these are my opinions, this is what I believe to be true, and we should be able to articulate that. But I think that it's gotten to a point where we have to have a zinger ready every single time that someone's speaking at us, be got you. I have a perfect response for that. When in reality, we're called to be patient. Even in those situations where it's I really need to butt in and tell you why you're wrong and why I'm right. We should really be thinking and seeking the Lord in how we respond to people. Before we're firing back those responses, we should be patient and we should listen and we should really articulate what's going on, whether that's a conversation we're preparing for or one that we're just kind of tossed into. You can take those moments to really ask the Lord to steady your heart and kind of quell any anger that's getting maybe a little bit too high in your body, but we can ask and know that we can have calmness and use that wisdom. So I don't know about you, but when I don't think on that, if I'm not praying constantly and I'm just in the midst of an argument, I usually just make things worse when I start firing back really fast, kind of like what I said with Amelia earlier. I'm becoming the fool that's described here. My foolish statement leads to another one, which will lead to another one, and they just keep going and going and going. And I'm trying to salvage a point and say, like, this is why I'm right and this is why you're wrong, but it never quite manifests to that point. And whether those are situations that are at home with my family, or my wife, my kids, at work with clients or coworkers, if I just took a break and really prayed for those situations, not only in the moment, but just in constant prayer leading up to those, a lot of fractured relationships or bad situations could probably be avoided. We should be in the practice of just praying constantly, because we're naturally going to be more like Jesus when we do that. So verse 15 says that the toil of the fool wearies him. If we can utilize wisdom every day that we're getting from the Lord by just being in constant prayer, we'll probably start to recognize that we have more physical energy or mental energy because we're not constantly fighting and battling, trying to get our points across. Our actions will be more loving. Our thoughts and our conversations will be the same. And I think, like I said, being able to pray to the Spirit constantly about any circumstance that we're going into, mundane or not, is going to change our hearts to be more like Jesus. And when we're more like him, wisdom is going to naturally flow into everyday life. And those changes that are being made aren't from us. It's the result of our ongoing sanctification. We're getting into good spiritual practices, and we're naturally going to be more like Jesus, which is what we want. So verses 16 through 18 say, "Woe to you, O land, when your king is a child, and your princes feast in the morning. Happy are you, O land, when your king is the son of nobility, and your princes feast at the proper time, for strength and not for drunkenness. Through sloth the roof sinks in, and through indolence the house leaks." So these are just continuing to follow the pattern of reiterating the need for wisdom in all aspects of life. The preacher is pointing out hardships that we're going to face when we are led by foolishness, when we're not seeking counsel from the Lord and letting him take control of those situations. But when we do that, things are going to hopefully be more successful than if we're just trying to use brute force and worldly wisdom to get through those situations. Verse 18 just shows the foolish tendency for things that we disregard kind of come back and bite us eventually. You don't maintain your home, it's going to start to fall apart. If you don't maintain your physical health, your body's going to end up starting to fail and it's going to break down. And if you're not maintaining spiritual habits, like good, healthy spiritual habits, your view of God and what he's done and those habits is going to start to deteriorate and blur and kind of become a little bit off. We should be in constant prayer. We should be getting into the word, to keep a clear focus on who God is and how he is helping us in every moment of life. Not just the small things or the things that we are asking for, but if we're maintaining healthy spiritual habits, we're going to be more like Jesus, and that exudes wisdom and peace and mercy towards other people. In the last verse, I don't have a whole lot to say on, but we can read it. Even in your thoughts, do not curse the king, nor in your bedroom curse the rich. For a bird of the air will carry your voice, or some winged creature tell the matter. I really think this is just a fancy way of saying the phrase, "a little birdie told me." Don't know what else to say on that, but we're called to be wise. If we are talking poorly about someone behind closed doors or to another person, chances are that's going to get back to that person somehow. And I think this can be kind of those flies in verse 1. It may not be this grandiose thing like this big act of foolishness, but if you say one thing to someone and they hear about it, well, that's going to kind of change their perception of who you are. And if that's something that's pretty constant, it's all those little things that are going to add up. And I think what that really shows is how people are seeing us and who we're supposed to be representing. As believers, we're supposed to be modeling Christ to others. So if all those little flies are getting into the ointment and it's kind of spoiling who you are and people who think of you as a believer, what is that going to do on their perception of who Jesus is? Obviously, we are broken people and we're not perfect, but we should be seeking the Lord in situations to be able to say, I'm going to choose wisdom. I'm not going to fall into this foolishness. Or if you do, using the wisdom to ask for forgiveness and say, this is not how I'm supposed to be, and actually taking ownership of that and not letting things fester or the ointment start to stink because there's so many little random acts of foolishness in it. So over the past few months of preparing this sermon, I've been pretty convicted of my own balance of wisdom versus foolishness. We'll go back to verse 4, that kind of focal point, the one that I really latched onto. And I can see how like the Spirit is really helping me to use wisdom when I'm talking with coworkers or clients at work or my family or people that might frustrate me. Like I'm seeing victory in that and like really being thankful for how the Spirit is growing me. But then I can look at verse 4 again and see my own foolishness clearly on display, because there are times that I'm not giving calm and level responses to Erica or Amelia or people at work. And that's really tough. But I think my biggest takeaway from this chapter and my biggest prayer for everyone else is that we should be praying that the Spirit would continue to sanctify us and help us to be more like Jesus. If there's any takeaway from this, I think it's to develop a habit of just being in constant prayer. We should be taking time to pray on the mundane things. I'm driving to work. I should just be praying about my drive. I should be praying about my work day. I'm changing diapers at home. I should be taking that time to pray for my daughter. I can utilize all these times to pray, and I don't. But we should want to do that, because if we're more like Jesus, if the Spirit is indwelling us and making us more like Jesus, then all of these wise decisions and these acts of foolishness will eventually be phased out and we will be more like Jesus. That is to say, we're not going to be wise all the time. There are going to be times when we lose our temper on our kids or our family. We're going to make poor decisions. We're going to say things that we shouldn't say because we're sinful and we are here under the sun in this moment. But we can look forward to the day that errors will be corrected and our own sinful foolishness will be gone. We can look forward to the day that Jesus is going to come back and everything is going to be made new, and that we won't have to worry about these things because we will be made new and we have a righteousness that is only coming through Jesus. So I'm going to pray, and then we are going to move on with the rest of our service because we got a lot going on. Father, I thank you that you do provide true wisdom and that we can recognize that. We can see the difference in who you are and who you call us to be and who the world says that we should be. Spirit, I just pray that you would just change our hearts, continue to make us more like Jesus. Help us to use wisdom and trust in you and be in constant prayer to handle our situations, because handling them like Jesus would handle them is far better than anything that we could do. Jesus, just make us more like you. Help us to seek you and seek your counsel in all things. In your name I pray.